What's the future for Libya? 7 years after the fall of dictator Muammar Gaddafi, armed groups control much of this oil-rich country. International talks in Italy were aimed at uniting Libya. So what hope, finally, for peace? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Martine. For more than 40 years, Libya was ruled with an iron fist by dictator Muammar Gaddafi until his reign came to a bloody end. That was in 2011. But since then, the country's been torn by civil war. Two rival governments dividing the country into East and West, and both backed by different countries. An international conference in Italy hoped to find a way to end the violence and to provide Libya with some form of stability. The only breakthrough, a commitment to a UN plan for elections to be held next year. We'll get to our guests shortly, but first, Jonah Hull reports from the conference that was held in Palermo.
30 countries attended this conference on Libya's future, but what really mattered took place among just a few. For the first time in 6 months, the country's two main power players met in the presence of their foreign backers. General Khalifa Haftar, who controls Libya's east, is supported by Egypt, Russia and France. Fayez al-Sarraj heads the UN and Italian-backed government in the capital, Tripoli. The atmosphere was described as cordial, leading UN envoy Hassan Salameh to declare the conference a success.
Palermo will be remembered as a milestone in this common efforts to help our Libyan friends have a clear path forward out of the situation in which the country has slipped into.
The measure of success here, the apparent agreement of the parties and international leaders to follow a new UN timeline. It foresees a national conference taking place in Libya to decide on a format for elections to take place by the middle of next year.
We want to reassure and ensure 6 million Libyan citizens, men and women who wish to vote, to decide their destiny and have stability with a united Libya, a stable Libya, looking forward to reach these goals. Libya is our friend. We have been linked for a long time.
What has emerged of substance from this conference then is a new UN action plan that picks up where many others have failed. It provides what the UN envoy described as a clear path forward for Libya. It is a path down which the Libyans themselves, not the international community, must lead. But the timeline is tight. In a resource-rich country riven with often violent internal rivalries and with foreign powers backing opposite sides to serve their own conflicting interests. The Palermo conference saw no written commitments, nothing signed. The UN envoy's clear path forwards then appears to be based on little more than trust. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Palermo, Italy.
Time to introduce our guests now. Joining us from Tripoli, Salah Al Bakkush, a political analyst and former senior advisor to the negotiating team of the High Council of States. And in Tunis, in neighbouring Tunisia, Youssef, a researcher in international relations. Welcome to you both. Salah, can I start with you in Tripoli? Does Palermo and this plan for a consultative conference to be held inside Libya early next year, followed by elections by June of next year, does this instill you with a great deal of confidence that Libya is finally on the path to peace?
I think it's an opportunity, a new opportunity. It provides a different framework, negotiating framework than the one in Skhirat and the one that was adopted even in Palermo. It brings together all the Libyan players that have a stake in the issues at hand. It will discuss more substantial issues such as the constitutional framework and the distribution of the wealth of the country, which is the core of the struggle in Libya now.
And Salah, staying with you, how much is this process, which Ghassan Salameh says is a milestone on the path forward, how much is this process reliant upon the buy-in of the Libyan people, 6.5 million of you?
As you know, the United Nations mission conducted about 70 to 80 meetings around the entire country, attended by over 8,000 people, and they produced a report that summarizes what the population most likely wants to see, and that's the building block for the conference. Additionally, there was a stalemate between the HOR, the House of Representatives, and the State Council and the Presidential Council about how to progress. And we've spent about 2 years since the implementation of the Libyan political agreement produced in Skhirat without any progress. So that's what forces, I guess, Ghassan Salameh's hand into adopting the second step, or Plan B, if you like, and going to a national conference with more participants than just the 4 that we saw in Palermo.
Right, OK. Coming to you then, Youssef, in Tunis, we saw an array of international actors attending this conference in Palermo. Everybody seems to have a vested interest, some kind of interest in the future of Libya. Briefly, if you can, tell us why, for instance, the French are so highly involved. The Italians, perhaps we can explain as a former colonial power, but what about Russia? What about Egypt?
I think this summarizes perhaps one of the biggest problems in Libya today, that there are a lot of international interference in Libya, and the international community is actually deeply involved in what's happening in Libya. So as you rightly pointed, I mean, Russia, which is far away, is there. France, which also was partly a semi-colonial power in Libya, but actually more of a colonial power in the whole North Africa and the Sahel region. So it has a lot of interest there. Italy, of course, but we've seen almost everybody represented in this conference, but not at their highest level. As you can see, the American president was not there, the French president was not there, the Russian president was not there. Of course, there was Medvedev was there, the Russian prime minister.
So what does that indicate? What does that indicate? The fact that the French president wasn't there, for instance.
Well, this kind of, I won't call it low level, but medium level attendance shows that the international community is very interested in Libya and invested in Libya, but not necessarily interested in finding a solution today. And they keep disagreeing with each other. And that's why they everyone sent his second or his third assistant, so that the conflict doesn't get too high among them. But there is still a big disagreement between most of these players in Libya. And not only them, there is also the regional players. So we're talking about Egypt, about the UAE, about Qatar, about Saudi Arabia, about Turkey. All of them were either very lowly represented, or like what happened with Turkey, they withdrew from the conference. So the international community, although there is an image of investment, in fact, they keep disagreeing with each other, and that keeps deepening the problems of Libya today.
So Salah, this what appears to be a huge international backing for the UN's sponsored plan now for Libya. Is it more of a hindrance than being helpful, given, as Younes has just pointed out, the kind of squabbling that we've seen, particularly between France and Italy?
I think the French president's absence was to save himself the embarrassment of presiding over the funeral of the Paris Agreement. Definitely, this Palermo conference buried the Paris Agreement, buried any attempt by the House, the State Council, and the House of Representatives to remove Sarraj, and moved full speed ahead with the with the national conference. I think the conflict between France and Italy is overblown, but I believe that Italian interference helped give the Libyans a chance to have a say in what happens next, instead of being forced on the Emirati, French, Egyptian train, heading straight to a collision with a, date
Salah,
uncertain for elections.
Can I just interrupt you there and ask, perhaps presumptuously, that you're sitting in Tripoli. The Tripoli administration, of course, is backed by the Italian government, but the French government is noted for its support for Khalifa Haftar and for the authorities in the east, in Benghazi. Is that informing your opinion somewhat?
Yes, but the French, the Egyptians, and the Emiratis, I believe, lately have reached an understanding or a conclusion that Haftar has done all he can do, and they can no longer hope that Haftar will overtake the west of the country, where all the major government installations are, where the central bank is, and where the national oil company is. And that's why I think they are resigned to the fact that a national conference will probably be the best thing, and try to get the best outcome for Haftar and his followers.
General Haftar, of course, is a military man, Salah, isn't he? He's known for being a modern-day strongman, if you like. If he's to be involved in this process now, he's going to have to do politics. Can he do politics in order to turn what is military power, military control in the east of the country, can he turn that into political power?
No, Haftar harks back to the generals and the military people of the Arab world in the 50s and 60s. And he believes that politics, unlike everybody else, politics is an extension of war. And that's why I think everybody had tried to convince him that there will be no military solution. He will be in the national conference, but he's not going to be a lone ranger in there. There will be a lot of other people, a lot of other military people, a lot of people who have military power from Misrata and Zintan and so on. So he won't have as much power as he had in Paris or Palermo.
And Youssef, so we've talked a lot about how there are many international players who've got an interest in what goes on in Libya. But explain for us, if you will, the significance of the fact that Turkey, one of the supporters of the authorities, or the players, if you like, in the west of the country, Turkey walked out, saying, the vice president saying he was deeply disappointed. What was that all about, and how significant is that?
Well, that's very significant, and I think that the details. I don't have the full details for that event, but probably what we've seen is actually a very clear rapprochement between Italy and Egypt in the Libyan case, and somewhat a lot of interest given to Haftar, which is from a pragmatic point of view is perhaps right, but first of all, from a UN-backed perspective, that's not necessarily what should happen. And from a Turkish and a Qatari perspective, that's definitely not what should happen. So the Turks definitely got upset when they seen that, and so they walked out. But not only them. As you can see, the representation, there was, as far as I know, there was no representation from the UAE. So how can you find a deal, at least on the international level, on Libya without having the UAE fully represented there? So again, what we will see, I think, in the upcoming months is, yes, the conference will take place in early 2019, but what we will see is actually more fightings from, Haftar, he will continue his move forward, because although he sees himself weak, but he still believes that he can do things and he can change things. And as we remember, in Benghazi, he spent years fighting there. It looked completely hopeless, and the city was completely destroyed. But by the end of the day, he was able to take it. And I think that's what he thinks he can do. And again, he thinks what he can do, not what necessarily he can do. So he will continue fighting. He will get the backing from the Egyptians, from the Emiratis, and from the other side, we will see Turkey as well as Qatar funding or backing powers that will be fighting against Haftar. So sadly, although there will be a conference in early 2019, I think we will see a continuation of the war, perhaps necessarily not immediately in Tripoli, but in several places in Libya. And the current situation will simply continue as it is.
Salah, is that something you agree with? I mean, this sounds as though it's going to be one of the major stumbling blocks, is the continuation of armed conflict and the widespread availability of weapons in Libya among the militias.
This is a myth about how strong Haftar is. Let me tell you, this year, a group of renegade guards of the oil facilities took over Haftar's biggest possession, the refineries, in 24 hours. He had to bring in help from Mohammed Dibbi, the son of Idris Dibbi, the president of Chad, to retake those facilities. And he was forced to hand them back to the government in Tripoli. When he talks about he is controlling 90% of Libya, he doesn't control anything other than the east. And so it's oversimplification and exaggeration of his power, and that's why we fell into the trap of the Europeans trying to appease Haftar based on exaggerations propagated by the Egyptians and the French and the Emiratis. There is no such thing. He cannot move on Tripoli. Tripoli is protected by two big forces that he has no way of fighting them or defeating them, the forces of Misrata and the forces of Zintan. So I don't expect any more fighting in Libya, major fighting in Libya, other than skirmishes in the east or the south. I think we will move to a national conference and move then in September probably to elections.
All right, so what do you see as being the major pitfalls, the possible hurdles, the obstacles then that could fall in the way of progress towards this national conference, Salah?
I think there are two issues here. We have agreed that this is going to be a new negotiating framework. There will be a problem in the selection of who's going to attend and who's not. The second thing is, what is this conference going to be talking about and what is it expected to produce? We know that whatever this conference is expected to produce will be adopted by through a resolution of the Security Council that will give it some kind of a legitimacy to bypass the House of Representatives and the State Council. So the issues that will be discussed there, it seems like we're going to discuss the division of oil revenues and also the type of government system Libya wants to have. I think these are the obstacles, and Salama needs to work very hard on overcoming them.
And Youssef, we spent quite a bit of time talking about the politics of the situation, both international and domestic, but we haven't really looked at the economics, and you can't really divorce the two, can you? Without economic progress in Libya, there's very little chance that any kind of political solution is going to work. And for that, presumably, Libya needs a huge amount of investment.
True, but no one would invest in a country in war, which is something that not only concerns Libya, but also if you take Tunisia, which is in a much peaceful, in a situation of peace, but still people do not invest because of political instability. So even more when it comes to a country where some acts of war are taking place, but also Libya needs other things such as the full unification of the central bank. And the oil producing company, which is happening, but not totally, and there are still issues taking place there. This was actually discussed in Palermo, and there were announcements that these problems will be fixed. But again, we're talking about declarations of intent, of very nice statements. I think Ghassan Salameh and his team are serious and genuinely believe that they were able to achieve things. But reality on the ground is a bit different. And the economic situation, I think that's what what the people inside Libya itself are feeling, and most Libyans are depressed about the future when it comes to the economic situation. One point that I want to add that relates economy to war is that there was a war economy that was created in Libya since 2011, and so you have a lot of militias on the ground that do strive thanks to the current civil war, and they will not give up easily their weapons and their privileges because of this fragile and disunited economic situation that makes them benefit from a lot of things.
And Salah, I'm looking at figures now from the National Oil Corporation, which has said that oil and gas revenue for the first half of this year, 2018, was $13.6 billion. Libya is still pumping, even in this precarious state, is pumping 1.2 million barrels per day. That's a huge amount. But then I go on to see that the National Oil Corporation is managing to turn over so much production as a result of entering into security arrangements with various militias. I mean, that's surely not sustainable, is it?
No, it's not sustainable, but I mean, the National Oil Company is doing a very decent job under the circumstances. But without, I mean, in an environment with this much political division, of course, you cannot secure these facilities, you cannot bring in investments, and the economy will lag behind. But I think the situation is much better than 2 years ago or even last year, and which will give the National Conference a better chance to succeed. I note that today, for example, this week, the liquidity crunch has started to ease, and people are starting to be able to withdraw more than 1,000 dinars a week instead of 500 dinars a month. So things are moving a little bit better. Of course, these are not solutions to a structural economic problems in Libya, but I think it's progressing, and I think the international community has to allow Libyans a chance to solve this problem and keep the regional powers and the international powers away. And I hope that will happen, especially with the cooperation of the Russians and the Egyptians with the Italians.
And Youssef, this national dialogue that has been underway that Salah's mentioned, it included the participation of more than 8,000 people, which actually is not a huge amount, a huge proportion of the 6.5 million Libyans that exist. But nonetheless, what exactly does this conference that is scheduled to be held early next year, what exactly should that conference yield in order for Libya to be able to move on to democratic elections within the space of months?
You know, it's important to have these kind of conferences, and it's good to be hopeful and optimistic about them, because at least that keeps the dialogue going and takes away a little bit from the dialogue of weapons. But my fear is that this is yet another conference about Libya, similar to the one we had bigger than the one we had in Palermo and in Paris, but similar to perhaps the one that took place over months at Cherif. And the final result is again disagreements and disagreements. What such conferences should do, I think, first of all, what is needed is to separate the problem in Libya into three. There is the local problem, Libyans among themselves. There is the regional problem, and here we have the Egyptians, the Emirati, the Qatari, the Algerians, and so on. And there is the international problem, and here we have the Italians, the French, the Russians, and so on. And these are completely different issues that need to be solved separately. So I think the priority is to work on one of these three tracks before going to a national conference that will be the exact repeat of what we've seen with Cherif, and with very, very limited results.
At that point, I'm afraid, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Thank you both very much indeed. Salah Al Bakkush in Tripoli and Youssef Cherif in Tunis. Thank you both very much indeed. And as ever, thank you for watching the programme. You can see it again anytime you like by going to the website, aljazeera.com. Should you want more discussion, you can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. There's always the conversation on Twitter as well. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. I'm @Martine Dennis. From me and the whole team here in Doha, it's bye for now.